Hello, and welcome to another episode of At Home with Joseph. I think everyone right now, this week of Thanksgiving, is feeling maybe a little sorrowful, wishing that they were able to see their extended family, to spend more time with loved ones. And I think resoundingly, a lot of us are choosing to stay safe rather than sorry. So I think today's episode, Potting Amaryllis and Paperweights, shows that it's even more important to find plumage and beauty in your own home. With that, I'll leave it over to Joseph, and everyone, please have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Bye.
Welcome back for another episode of At Home with Joseph. And today we're going to be talking about planting some bulbs that are normally thought of for Christmas time. And typically, most people think about planting these for Christmas to be blooming during the holiday season. So most people end up starting to force them in pots in the beginning of November. I, however, prefer to wait until the end of November, beginning of December, so that I can force them in January and going into February. I like to use them for a new year. It gives a little bit of life in the home when everything outside is cold and dreary. So we're going to show a couple different ways to pot them. You can either do it in soil, or you can do it in a hard medium in a vase of water. The first important thing to do when you are working with soil for forcing bulbs is you want to use a really loose potting soil, and you don't want to have it too wet at first when you want to plant the bulb. One thing that I like to do is add some extra peat moss to the soil to make it really light so that the roots can really grow through the soil mixture. We're going to add a good amount of peat moss to this. And I'm just going to mix it in with my hands. The peat moss will actually help to retain a lot of the moisture in the soil when you water the bulbs. Okay, so we've got a nice loamy mixture that the bulbs can actually grow into, and it won't suffocate the roots of them with a soil that is too heavy. So this is an amaryllis bulb. They're quite large, and because the bulb is so large, the greenery and as well as the flower is going to be very large. So you're going to want a container that's going to have some sturdiness, because once they start to grow, they're going to get very top heavy. And so you want a container that's going to have some heft to it so that they don't fall over. And the first one that I'm going to do is in this beautiful vintage vase, which I'm going to do with a substrate of rocks. It's actually crushed shell. And I like to use this, one, because I like the look of it, but two, it's much like sand or soil. It has a very fine component to it. So unlike using larger stones or even those glass balls that a lot of people use in vases, this to me makes a nicer presentation, and it allows the roots to grow through it a lot more easily. So I want to fill a good 2 to 3 inches in the bottom of this vase with the shell mixture. And the reason that I want to do that is because I want to give the roots enough room to grow in. And I also am not going to keep this watered above the shell, because I don't want to rot the actual bulb. And with that in there, I'm actually going to fill it with water to start with, right up to the level of the crushed shell. And then I'm going to gently place my bulb down inside, and I'm going to give it a few turns so that about 1/4 of the bulb is lodged into the substrate. And so normally with this, I would not finish this off with any type of a moss or any type of a filler on top. I love how clean this looks. And this is just going to look great sitting on a table as it grows. And the height of it is going to get, you know, probably double in height of what the vase is. So it's going to be a really beautiful flower. I love to use florals and bulbs and plants in urns like this. I have a whole collection of them. And the next bulb that I'm going to do is going to be in here, and it's actually going to sit halfway inside of this container. And because this goes down pretty deep into the bottom of the urn, I'm going to fill this with soil, because the roots are going to grow down and secure themselves pretty far down into the soil. So I'm going to put a couple of spoonfuls of soil down in the bottom. And I want to pack it in so that I know that it's nice and full down in there for the bulb to sit in. And you can see I've still got quite a bit of room here, which I am going to add more soil to, but I want to get the bulb in there first and add a little bit around it. So I'm going to set the bulb in. Again, give it a few good turns to anchor it. When you're using soil for these bulbs, you don't have to worry about covering up the bulb. Normally, if these were planted in a garden, they would be underneath the soil level. And we're just going to tamp it down a little bit with our fingers to make sure the spaces are filled with soil. And we're going to add a little bit of water to this vase. Now, I don't want to put a lot of water in here because I don't want to waterlog the bulb. So we're just going to let that soak in for a moment. Remember, there's a lot of peat moss in here, so it's really airy, and it will take a few minutes for the water to absorb into it. And once that is done, I'm going to finish this off with a little bit of green moss because I want to see some nice greenery and texture coming out of this urn there. And that's a beautiful urn with an amaryllis bulb. Now, when this grows, I'm not going to do it yet, but when this grows, I will put a stake in here. I like to use the long wooden skewers that you use for cooking. And then I will tie some type of a branch or something to it so that it's sturdy but looks beautiful. And as this grows, you're going to want to secure that to the stake so that it grows straight up and doesn't flop over. And another great vessel is things that you can find at thrift stores or antique shops. This is an old trophy that a friend of mine sent me, which I absolutely adore. And I think that this would be amazing as a planter for an amaryllis. It has a smaller base than a top, and it's a little tippy. So I've gone out in the garden and I've gotten some of these dark black river rocks, and I'm going to line the bottom of this to give it some weight so that it doesn't tip over so easily. But also, after I add the soil, this is going to help to give drainage in the bottom of the urn so that the roots don't get waterlogged down in there. Add our soil. I'm going to tamp it down and make sure the soil is nice and in there, because if you don't, when you start watering it, the soil is just going to start settling down into the bottom in all of the air pockets that you missed where you thought it might have been filled with soil. Our bulb in the center. Squeeze it down so that it's nice and in there and firm, and then I'm going to fill this up with some more soil. I like to go to thrift shops or antique shows during the fall and pick up odd pieces like this that you can collect for really cheap and make nice gifts out of this. Imagine somebody bringing this over to your house for Christmas, and you get to watch for the next 6 weeks for this to grow and then finally bloom. And then you can actually put the bulb out in your garden. And I think because of the color of this vase and where I want to use it, rather than using moss on it, I'm going to finish it off with some of this excelsior. This is shaved wood, and it does make a nice topping for planting plants or bulbs, or even finishing off a floral arrangement. Gives it a really nice, beautiful, light, organic look. And so there is another vessel that you can use that's quite beautiful to plant and force a bulb in. So we potted our beautiful amaryllis bulbs, and now I want to do a few paper whites. Again, it's another winter bulb that's very easy to force. It doesn't require a cold spell in order to have it flower. And paper whites are a little bit smaller of a bulb. They are narcissus. They can be very difficult to find closer to the Christmas season. So if you're thinking about using these, go ahead and order them ahead of time in September or October, or there's a lot of bulb resources online for ordering these. And I've got a few left here to do a demonstration for from the ones that I've already potted as gifts for friends. So consider using these in a terrarium format. This is an old candy jar that I picked up at an antique shop, and it makes a really good terrarium to have the bulb inside. This creates some humidity that will help the bulb actually grow a little bit quicker, but it makes it a really nice focal point that you can look inside the glass jar to see it growing. So the first thing I'm going to do, because you can see the interior of this, I'm going to line it with some moss, which is going to give a really nice visual look when you're looking at it from the outside. And inside that moss, I'm going to add a little bit of dirt. And the best way to do this is to tip this on its side so that you're not getting everything dirty. I'm going to grow just one bulb in this terrarium, but I'm going to sink it in, and I'm going to finish the other side off with another little piece of moss. Maybe a little bit more on the top there. This is fresh live moss, and moss does incredibly well in a terrarium. There. Before we water it, we want to clean off our vessel and get around the inside that might have any of the dirt in it. I'm going to give it a little bit of water in there, not too much, because you don't want it to get waterlogged, but you'll start to see the water coming up. And just as you see it start to come up on the bottom there, you've got enough. You don't want to overwater this. If you do start to overwater it, because it's a terrarium, it's only going to start to mold if it has too much humidity. I'm just going to leave mine open like this, and it's just going to grow beautifully right out the top of this jar. Another great and very easy presentation, another really great gift idea actually, is to find some old teacups. We're going to pot this for a friend of ours. And because this does not give me a lot of space for the roots to grow in, I want to fill up most of the cup, almost to the top. I'm going to nestle this right in. We're going to give it some water, not too much, just enough to get it to the roots to start wicking up the water. And then I think we're going to finish this with some of these air plants that I've picked out of the tree in the yard. I think these are quite lovely. And they make kind of a dramatic presentation with this. And there you have a beautiful teacup gift for somebody. Another great presentation for paper whites that I have always loved is just a natural wood box. And this is just a repurposed box that I had from another floral arrangement. And I don't have a liner for this. So instead, if you don't have a liner for something, consider lining it with a piece of parchment paper. It almost looks like a bakery box, but with plants growing out of it. So in this, I'm going to add a couple of my river rocks, which is just going to give it a heavy, solid base. And then I'm going to fill this with soil. And because this is a larger vessel, I'm going to do several bulbs in here. I'm going to give it a little bit more soil around. And so because I have this parchment liner, no water is going to come out of this. So it's going to be watertight. And then I'm going to finish this off with some more of my moss because I think that's going to be really beautiful. So right now I'm covering the bulbs with the moss, but I can feel with my fingers, there's space for those to pop right on through that moss. Doesn't that make a great presentation to bring to somebody's house? The other thing that I love about gifting bulbs like this is that you don't really have to worry about too much wrapping. Sometimes just a simple, beautiful ribbon around it is all that's needed. And this is a gift that's going to go to one of my next door neighbors for Christmas. It makes a really simple, lovely gift that's really easy to make and pretty inexpensive. So a great, inexpensive, very unique gift that you can give to somebody during the holidays is a bulb that's being forced in a plain old tin can. And these are just crushed tomato tin cans that I've used, cleaned the labels off of them and saved them in the cabinet. And I do that every year from about summer through the fall so that I can use these for gift giving. And the presentation is really beautiful and it's really inexpensive, but really it is the thought that counts. In the can, I'm going to add some of my crushed shells on the bottom because I won't have a hole in here. So I want to have some kind of drainage on the bottom. And then we're going to add some of our soil into the can. We're going to press our bulb down so that it's firmly planted in. And for this, I'm going to use some of our Excelsior because this is going to look really great popping out of a plain old paper sandwich bag. We're going to set our can into the bag. We're going to roll the sides down very gently so that you don't rip the bag. And then we're going to take some red butcher twine and we're just going to tie the collar of the bag with a little bow. Trim the sides. And you have a really beautiful, inexpensive presentation to give for a Christmas gift. So with just a few dollars, we've created a really abundant display to have throughout our house and also some unique gift ideas to give to some friends over the holidays. So thank you for joining me today. I always love to pop bulbs like this around the holiday times, and I hope that it inspires you to do the same. Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining again. So we are in the week leading up to Thanksgiving, and you're probably deep into your plans for getting ready for that. But this is actually the week that I spend some time potting my bulbs because I don't usually use them in bloom for Christmas time. I like to pot them a little bit late and allow them to bloom for either New Year's and use them if I'm gonna have a New Year's Eve party or a New Year's Day brunch. But also I'll pot them even in that whole week, several different days, so that they're actually blooming all throughout January and into February. It's really great when it's super cold outside, although I live in Florida now, so it's not cold down here during those months. But up in the Northeast, it would be so great when you're stuck inside to have all of these beautiful, fresh potted bulbs blooming in full force. So I have a couple questions that we can get to. And the first one is, if you live in New York City and you don't have a house for all of this equipment and you don't have a lot of space, what would I suggest? So I don't think that doing this type of a craft project requires a lot of materials. Most of the materials that you're going to use will all be things that will go into the arrangement. So one of the things that you can do is just get a small plastic bin and label it. And all of these supplies can come in very small quantities. So you can pick up just what you need, and you can repurpose things like I did with the tin can. You can repurpose things so that you don't have to go out and buy a lot of vases and containers to put these things in. But you really can use almost anything. You can use glasses, you can use vases, teacups, if you've got some old teacups sitting around, any old wooden boxes, really anything that can hold watertight soil in it makes a great vessel for doing these bulbs in. The next question is, what was the composite that you used in the teacup? That was crushed shell. And to piggyback, there's another question that is, are there resources for the crushed shell? I actually bought that at Joann's Fabric, and I don't think most people think of Joann's Fabric as a craft store that carries floral products, but they do. I believe also somewhere like a Michael's would carry it. But also there's a huge range of different types of crushed shell on Etsy. So Etsy is another great resource to search on, and you can get different colored crushed shells on Etsy. So that's a great resource for it. But it's crushed so small that it actually allows the roots to freely grow through that. Whereas if you're using a larger rock, or sometimes those glass pebbles that a lot of people use, the roots can tend to get root bound in those because they can't push through it. So the crushed shell is really great for using for things like that. The next question is, how often do you need to water, and what care is necessary in terms of sunlight and humidity? So you only need to keep it watered so that the soil is moist, or that the vase, if it doesn't have soil in it and it has the crushed stone, has a small layer of water just touching the bottom of the bulb where the roots will start to come down. You don't want to water it any more than that. You don't want to waterlog the bulb. Bulbs actually retain a lot of water within them, so they don't require as much water as a potted plant would. But you put it in some, bright sunlight, somewhere on a windowsill, or even a table in a room that gets some pretty good diffused sunlight works fine. They don't really require a lot of attention other than staking them as they grow. So they're really easy to pot and to use at home, and also in apartments, and again, to give as gifts. They make great gift giving. How long do amaryllis take to bloom versus paperwhites? So paperwhites bloom in about 4 to 6 weeks. I have always found mine at about 5 is when they bloom. Amaryllis take a little bit longer because it's a larger bulb. So they take about 6 to 8 weeks. And usually my amaryllis are a full 8 weeks before they really do start to pop their flowers. So again, when you're doing this, if you're trying to time it for Christmas, to bloom at Christmas Eve or on Christmas Day, or if you're having a Christmas party, timing is really essential. But like I said, I pot them the week of Thanksgiving, knowing that I'm going to enjoy these all through January. So as the paperwhites die out, the amaryllis lasts longer. So really January starts with the paperwhites, and through till the end of January, I've got amaryllis all over my house blooming. Where did you get the fresh live moss? I got that from a floral supply shop here in St. Petersburg. But any town that you live in, if you Google wholesale floral market, they will likely allow you to come in and purchase a case of it. It's usually about $35 a case for fresh moss. But if you can't find a resource, or
your wholesaler is really strict about not selling to the general public, find a local florist. They can usually get a resource for it. They can either order a case for you. They may mark it up some. But if it is a florist that does use moss, they might just sell you a small quantity for whatever it is that you are needing. So check with a florist if you can't find a wholesale market. How often do you water the planted bulbs? Only just to keep the soil moist. So every couple of days. You don't want to keep the soil waterlogged because the bulbs actually retain a lot of moisture within themselves. Can you use anything to plant them in? I randomly saw a photo of a bulb being put in plastic beads. Yes, anything that the roots can grow through, you can grow a bulb in. So normally these bulbs are planted in the ground, so they're completely submerged in dirt. Usually when you're forcing bulbs, you don't have to submerge them all the way in dirt. The bulb can literally just, even on top of a very small vase where the bulb is on top of it, and allow the roots to grow right into the water with nothing else. You can literally grow them in anything that you can put water in. So yeah. Can either of these bloom multiple times? Not in one season, but usually they have multiple blooms on them. So a lot of times with Paperwhites, you'll see, 5 or 6 little flowers come up, but there's also 3 or 4 more buds that may bloom the next day or 2 days later. Same thing with the Amaryllis. You may get one bud that will open, and 3 or 4 days later, the rest will open. So they have several buds on them that will open at different random times. But past that, they won't bloom again in that season. You will have to take them out of the water, dry the bulbs out, keep them in a very low humid spot to dry out. If it's not going to be too long, you can keep them in a cool refrigerator in a crisper drawer. But you've got to give them a dormant period in order to be able to pop them again and have them rebloom. Do you have to water the unused moss? So if you're using moss on the potted bulbs that you have, it's a good idea to have a spray bottle to spray the moss to keep it moist. That's going to keep it green and keep it from looking dried out. But you don't actually have to water the moss. I mean, you can submerge it in water if you want to, but just a little spray every couple of days on the moss will keep it alive and growing. If the moss is sitting on soil, however, and the soil is moist enough, that should be enough to keep the moss from drying out. So it should be a fairly easy thing to take care of. And so I don't have any other questions coming in. So we're probably going to wrap up. I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. I know it's kind of a strange time, but this year we really should celebrate everything that we're happy for. And because we're all stuck at home in small groups, if you find yourself being bored this year, take a drive over to Home Depot or Lowe's. They do sell these bulbs at both of those stores. Pick up some bulbs and try potting a few and see how they grow in your home throughout January and into February. I think it's going to be a long winter and we could all use some fresh blooms in our homes. So thank you for joining, and we will see you again next week. Have a great one.